It was a morning like any other for David, a dedicated doctor who, over the years, had grown accustomed to the predictability of his routine. The hospital was always ready, with the same white corridors and the same medical staff. David had become a master at handling emergencies, but secretly, he felt something was missing from his life. He had lost the sense of purpose that had once inspired him to pursue a medical career. Sitting in the break room, David's gaze drifted over patient files one after another, without really reading each word. The constant hum of monitors and the distant murmur of colleagues' conversations had blended into a background soundtrack that now seemed unbearably monotonous. Even the small daily victories like stabilizing a patient or receiving a thank you seemed to have lost their shine. David sighed and looked out the office window. The sky was clear and the sun was shining, but he still felt trapped, as if the hospital routine was an invisible cage confining him. He wondered if his life was truly making a difference, or if he was just following a predestined path of monotony. He ran his fingers along the edge of his cold coffee, reflecting on how the hours dragged on and the weeks merged together. Years had passed, but the feeling of being stuck in an endless cycle seemed to persist. Night shifts and exhausting hours could not mask the growing sense of dissatisfaction. David got up and went to the window, looking out at the city below at the constant flow of people and cars. He felt there was something more, something beyond the hospital walls, something that could reignite the passion he once had for medicine. But what could it be? He was searching for a sign, a change, something that could give his life new purpose, something that would make him feel like he was truly making a difference. As David lost himself in his thoughts, the city continued its routine, unaware of the silent, desperate search of a man yearning for something to transform his life. David drove through the city with his mind still immersed in the monotony of his day, trying to shake off the feeling of boredom that accompanied him. The traffic was heavy, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, creating dancing patterns on the asphalt. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't immediately notice the scene unfolding by the side of the road. It was a silent scream that made him stop abruptly. David looked to the side and his heart stopped for a moment. On the sidewalk, just a few meters away, a small figure lay on the ground. It was a child, probably no older than 5, lying motionless. Her dress was dirty and torn, and her skin was covered in cuts and smudges of dirt. Her hair was tangled, and she was completely still. David parked the car in a rush, thinking only of the urgent need to help. He got out of the vehicle and ran to the child, feeling the weight of each step. The sight was heart-wrenching. The little girl was in critical condition, and David realized that her life might be in imminent danger. He knelt beside her carefully, trying not to frighten her. Her eyes, although closed, seemed vacant and vulnerable. The doctor immediately began to assess the situation, checking vital signs while trying to stay calm. With a mix of urgency and desperation, he pulled out his phone and called the hospital, explaining the situation with a trembling voice. Amidst the chaos, David felt a wave of emotions: anger at the cruelty that had brought the girl to this state, sadness for the suffering she had endured, and a fierce determination to do everything in his power to save her. Every second felt like an eternity as he awaited the arrival of the ambulance, and David was acutely aware that his life and the little girl's were intertwined in that crucial moment. Finally, the ambulance arrived, and the paramedics quickly took over, beginning to stabilize the child. David watched with a heavy heart as they prepared her for transport. He knew that this situation was not just an accident, but a desperate cry from fate, and he was determined to answer that call. What David didn't know was that this unexpected encounter would forever alter the course of his life, challenging all his expectations and revealing a new perspective on what it truly means to make a difference. David's silent cry echoed in his mind as he bent down to examine the injured girl. There was no time for hesitation or room for doubt. The instinct to save, something buried under years of routine and fatigue, surged with overwhelming intensity. David felt a deep and uncontrollable drive, as if fate had placed him in that exact moment and place to fulfill a greater purpose. He got up, and with steady and determined hands, did what needed to be done. The first thing he did was check the girl's breathing, placing his ear near her mouth and feeling the faint touch of her breath against his skin. His heart pounded, not just from adrenaline, but from palpable concern. Her life was in his hands, and the weight of that responsibility was overwhelming. David glanced at the surrounding traffic, noticing the curious looks from passers-by and the distant sound of approaching sirens. He stepped back slightly, allowing the paramedics to take control of the situation. But his role was far from over. There was no simply walking away and returning to his previous routine. Something inside him had changed irrevocably. Are you enjoying the story so far? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this one. As the girl was carefully placed on the stretcher, David felt a wave of gratitude and urgency. He knew he needed to follow the emergency team to the hospital, not just to ensure the girl received the treatment she needed, but also to make sure the situation was monitored with the utmost care. He quickly headed to his car, his heart still racing, and followed the ambulance through the streets. During the drive, David reflected on what had just happened. The world around him seemed more vivid, every color and sound heightened by the adrenaline. He was in a sort of trance, driven by the desire to make a difference and turn that desperate situation into something positive. The ambulance siren cut through the air with an urgent sound, reverberating through the streets as David, heart racing, tried not to lose sight of the emergency vehicle. Each traffic light seemed to take forever to change, and every car that didn't move quickly enough heightened his anxiety. Time was a relentless enemy, and David knew every second mattered. The image of the girl, still unconscious and pale, was etched in his mind. He knew he needed to do everything in his power to ensure she reached the hospital alive. His hands, though trembling with tension, were steady and determined as he worked to stabilize her. The pressure was overwhelming, and David felt the weight of responsibility in every movement. As he drove, David tried to stay focused despite the growing sense of panic. He mentally reviewed medical protocols, recalling each necessary procedure. His thoughts were a blend of clinical procedures and a silent plea for the girl to hold on, for him to win this race against time. When he arrived at the hospital, the emergency team was ready, their professional expressions revealing a mix of urgency and calm. David knew he couldn't afford to falter. He helped transfer the girl from the ambulance to the emergency room table, every movement filled with precision and anxiety. The doctors began working immediately, and David stood by, observing every step, every monitor being turned on, and every calculated move by the team. He felt the tension in the air, the cold sweat on his forehead, and the need to stay calm to assist in the best way possible. As the team worked, David felt a wave of helplessness mixed with hope. The struggle to stabilize the girl was intense and challenging, and he knew the outcome would depend on the speed and effectiveness of the medical team's actions. Every minute felt like an eternity, but he remained resolute, determined not to step away or abandon the girl. The fight to save the little girl's life was a constant battle against the clock, and David felt each moment as immense pressure. The fear of failure and the hope that everything would turn out well were intertwined, creating a tension that felt almost unbearable. And amid this struggle, David discovered something deeper about himself, a strength that emerged in the heat of the battle, in the desperate attempt to overcome the relentless enemy of time. At the hospital, the scene was a controlled frenzy. The medical team moved with impressive precision and urgency, each member assuming their role with almost palpable dedication. Lights flashed, monitors beeped, and a constant hum filled the air as the professionals worked to stabilize the girl. David was at the center of it all, an active and distressed observer. He found himself caught between chaos and hope, his gaze fixed on the small patient now surrounded by doctors and nurses. Every gesture was calculated, every movement a piece of a complex puzzle in a race against time. As the team focused on saving the girl's life, David felt an irresistible urge to seek answers. The chaotic hospital environment seemed almost a stark contrast to his growing need to understand the situation deeply. He approached one of the doctors, his voice filled with a mix of anxiety and determination. "I need to know what happened to her," David said, his voice steady despite the internal turmoil. How did she end up on the street like this? Does anyone have any idea? The doctor looked at David, understanding the urgency in his eyes. We're trying to figure that out too. The priority right now is to stabilize her and ensure she is safe. The answers will come later. David nodded, but the unease remained. He watched every step the doctors took, every decision, every command given with almost clinical precision. His thoughts revolved around the possibilities, the parents who might have abandoned the girl, the circumstances that had left her so vulnerable. The image of her alone and injured on the sidewalk felt like a scar in his mind, demanding an explanation. As the team worked to stabilize the girl, David decided to take action. He went to the hospital's records office where he began searching for any information that might help clarify what had happened. With nervous hands, he examined documents and asked questions, determined to find clues that could reveal the truth. Deep down, David knew that searching for answers was more than a practical necessity. It was a way to make sense of the chaos he had witnessed. Amidst the chaotic marathon of medical procedures, he became a beacon of hope, a link between tragedy and the possibility of a better future. Every passing minute felt like an eternity, but David was immersed in his mission to understand and, if possible, to do more. He was determined not only to find the answers he sought, but also to hold on to the hope that despite the chaos and suffering, something positive might emerge. And while the team continued their fight to save the girl's life, David was there, fervently committed to uncovering the truth and ensuring the child had a chance at a new beginning. In the muffled silence of the records office, David was absorbed in searching for clues that could reveal the story behind the injured girl. The surroundings were a maze of papers and files, a stark contrast to the frenetic activity of the hospital. He sifted through documents with almost desperate determination, his mind a swirl of questions and doubts. The medical team, while continuing their tireless work to stabilize the girl, was equally dedicated to learning more about her. They reviewed previous emergency records, interviewed witnesses, and tried to connect the dots that might explain how the child ended up in that situation. David joined the search, determined to uncover the truth. He spoke with the paramedics who had transported the girl, trying to extract any additional information they might have observed. One of the paramedics mentioned that during the trip, the girl had murmured some disconnected words which seemed like an attempt to communicate something but could not be clearly understood. She seemed scared and confused, the paramedic said with a look of sadness. I picked up a few words, but nothing that gave us a solid lead. David furrowed his brow. Every piece of information was crucial, and he clung to these details in the hope they might offer some insight. He decided to take a different approach and began talking to local residents, those who were nearby when the girl was found. One resident mentioned seeing a couple arguing near the area where the girl was discovered, but the argument seemed to be about something personal rather than specifically involving the child. David noted that these clues, although vaguely connected, could help piece together a clearer picture of the situation. Meanwhile, the medical team managed to identify some marks and scars indicating a pattern of abuse. These signs, combined with the girl's overall condition, began to paint a disturbing picture of abandonment and neglect. David realized that to fully understand the girl's suffering, he needed to consider not only the physical evidence, but also the emotional and psychological context in which she had been left. That night, as David pored over the documents and the gathered information, he felt a growing sense of urgency. The girl's story was not just a series of disconnected events, but a narrative of pain and despair that needed to be understood and somehow alleviated. Each piece of the puzzle he managed to fit together brought him a step closer to delivering some form of justice and understanding for the child. David realized that his quest for answers was more than just an investigation. It was an effort to restore the girl's dignity and give her a chance for recovery and hope. Amid the chaos and complexity of the situation, he remained steadfast in his mission to uncover the truth, determined to ensure that the girl, despite her dark past, could have a chance at a better future. As the hours turned into days at the hospital, David found himself increasingly immersed in the world of the small patient. Constant monitoring, daily visits and treatment oversight became part of his routine. But what began as a rescue mission evolved into something much deeper. David couldn't shake the growing feeling that there was something special and personal about this fragile little life he was trying to save. The girl, still unconscious and surrounded by a sea of medications and equipment, embodied a vulnerability that David felt in his own being. Each small improvement, each sign of recovery, seemed to be a testament to a collective effort that went beyond medical work. It was proof of hope and humanity. As the days passed, David spent hours by the girl's side, speaking to her softly, as if his words could offer some comfort, even if she couldn't hear them. He talked about simple things, like the sunlight streaming through the window and the flowers waiting to be seen. Sometimes he shared stories about his own life, trying to create an invisible bond that transcended the space between them. Over time, David began to notice something unexpected. Even in her unconscious state, the girl seemed to respond to his words and presence. There was something in the monitors, in the subtle changes in her vital signs, that indicated a small but significant progress. Each slight movement, each change in her breathing, seemed to show that his presence was, in some way, making a difference. This bond started to become more tangible for David. His sense of responsibility transformed into a deep desire to protect and care for the girl, a desire that went beyond the professional. He found himself imagining what her life could be like outside the hospital, how he might provide her with a safe and loving home. The idea of adopting the girl, which initially seemed distant and unlikely, began to form in his mind as a concrete and desired possibility. David found himself at an emotional crossroads. Every time the girl showed signs of improvement, he felt a growing affection and a renewed determination to ensure she had a better future. The desire to protect her became a guiding thread, connecting him to his mission in a more intense and personal way. The connection between David and the girl was not just a matter of medical care. It was a relationship that touched his heart and soul. In every look, in every gesture of tenderness he offered, there was a silent recognition that he was becoming part of something greater, a story of healing, hope, and unexpected love. As David spent more time by the girl's side, their bond grew stronger, revealing a profound truth. Sometimes, the most meaningful connections are formed in the most unexpected circumstances, and the desire to protect and care can become a powerful force that redefines the meaning of family and love. The days dragged on in the hospital, and David found himself increasingly involved in the girl's life. The bond between them had become a constant in his life, and the desire to protect her and offer her a better future was always on his mind. However, with this growing connection came a moral and emotional dilemma that David hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, while watching the girl sleep peacefully, David sank into an empty chair in the break room. His thoughts revolved around a question that seemed to become more unbearable each day: the possibility of adopting the girl. It was an idea that had slowly germinated, but was now taking on a concrete and challenging form. He knew that adopting the girl wasn't a decision to be taken lightly. It was a monumental responsibility, a life-changing commitment that would affect not only the girl, but David himself. An endless list of questions and concerns arose in his mind. Would he be able to provide the home and care she needed? Could his own professional and personal life accommodate this new responsibility? And above all, was he prepared to commit to her life forever? The complexity of the moral dilemma was not only in the practical aspects but also in the emotional and ethical implications. David felt deeply moved by the girl's story and the situation she had endured. He knew that the desire to adopt her wasn't just a fleeting impulse but a sincere response to the suffering she had endured. However, the idea of taking on such a significant role in her life also brought with it a constant fear of failing. In conversations with friends and colleagues, David shared his doubts, seeking advice and opinions. Some supported him, acknowledging the strength and dedication he had shown. Others raised valid concerns about the complexities of adoption and the impact it might have on his life and the girl's life. Each piece of advice and every discussion about adoption made David more introspective. He pondered the balance between the desire to do good and the reality of his own limitations and fears. There was an inner voice telling him that adoption would be the right choice, but there was also a whisper of uncertainty he couldn't silence. David found himself in a constant internal battle, torn between the desire to provide a safe and loving home for the girl and the concern about the impact of his decision on his own life and the child's life. He questioned his own motivations, reflecting on whether his drive came from a genuine desire to care or if he was being driven by a sense of moral obligation. The decision seemed increasingly difficult, and the moral and emotional dilemma became a constant shadow in his life. David knew that, regardless of the choice he made, the consequences would be profound and lasting. Amidst this internal struggle, he sought clarity that seemed elusive, hoping to find an answer that could reconcile his desire to protect with the complex reality of adoption. After weeks of introspection and consultations, David finally made the decision that would change their lives forever. He had spent hours talking with friends, family, and colleagues, seeking advice and trying to balance his fears and hopes. Each conversation and reflection brought him closer to a resolution he felt was the only true answer to the dilemma he faced. The decision was not easy. David had considered every angle, weighed his own limitations, and reflected deeply on the responsibility he was about to undertake. However, the desire to offer a better future for the girl, to provide her with a home where she could feel safe and loved, outweighed all his doubts. That day, when he was finally ready to communicate his decision, David felt a mix of relief and nervousness. He walked into the room where the girl was resting, still a bit weak, but showing visible signs of recovery. Their eyes met, and he felt a deep connection that had guided him to this point. David approached and, with a heart full of emotion, spoke with the social workers. He shared his decision, a choice that was both a testament to his dedication and a commitment to the girl's future. He was determined to adopt her, to give her the home and life she deserved. The adoption process was complex and required a series of legal formalities and rigorous checks, but David faced each step with determination, supported by the encouragement of friends and colleagues who helped him stay focused. The medical team, who had witnessed the girl's journey and David's commitment, also expressed their support, acknowledging the effort and passion he had devoted to the cause. Finally, the day of the adoption arrived. David was nervous and full of anticipation as he awaited the final confirmation. When the process was complete and the decision was official, he felt a wave of relief and joy, mixed with a renewed sense of responsibility. When David brought the girl home for the first time, he was aware that they were starting a new chapter together. The home he had prepared was filled with care and love, and he dedicated himself to creating a safe and welcoming environment. The first few weeks were a mix of adjustment and discovery, but the little girl, now in a loving home, began to thrive. The transformation was noticeable. The girl, once so fragile and vulnerable, began to show signs of trust and happiness. David, in turn, found a new purpose in his life, a sense of fulfillment that transcended any challenge he had faced. This new beginning was not just about a new house for the girl, but about creating a promising future for both of them. David saw himself not just as an adoptive father, but as a guide and protector on a journey of growth and healing. In each smile, in every small achievement of the girl, he found confirmation that his decision had been the right one, and that despite the difficulties, love and hope had prevailed. The sun gently set on the horizon, casting a golden light over David and the girl's new home. The house, which had once seemed like an empty and cold space, was now filled with life and warmth. Every corner reflected the affection and care David had put into making it a true home. David and the girl began to adapt to their new routine. The first weeks were a blend of challenges and joys, but progress was evident. Over time, the girl started to show clear signs of emotional recovery. Her gaze, which once carried the sadness and fear of a painful past, now brightened with newfound confidence. She laughed more often, explored her new home with curiosity, and began to make friends in the neighborhood. On a quiet afternoon, David sat in the garden, watching the girl play with some flowers she had planted. There was something magical about the way she engaged with nature, as if each tiny flower and leaf held a promise of a better future. David sat beside her, feeling an inner peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. The girl ran up to him, bringing a small bouquet of flowers, her eyes shining with pure joy. "Look, Daddy, the flowers are beautiful," she exclaimed, handing him the bouquet with a radiant smile. David smiled back, his heart warmed by the simplicity and depth of the moment. He realized that through an act of compassion, he had created a new reality for both of them. The home they had built together was filled with love, hope, and possibilities. Over time, the girl began to open up more about her past, sharing memories and feelings with David. He listened with patience and understanding, helping her process her experiences and build a new sense of identity and belonging. Therapy sessions and ongoing care were aiding her recovery, but the true transformation was happening at home, in the safety and affection of her new family. David also began to notice changes in himself. The life he had known before was now enriched by a new perspective. He felt more complete, more connected to his own humanity. The journey that started with an act of rescue had evolved into a story of renewal and hope. The girl had become a source of inspiration and strength, and David found a deeper purpose in his role as an adoptive father. The surrounding community also began to notice the change. Friends and neighbors who had been following their journey from the beginning saw the transformation up close and joined them in celebrations and moments of joy. The community's support was a constant reminder that the impact of an act of compassion can resonate beyond the walls of a home, touching lives in ways beyond what was expected. As the sun set over David and the girl's home, the scene unfolding was a powerful testament to how an act of courage and love can transform lives and create new hopes. Their story, marked by challenges and triumphs, was just beginning, and each passing day was a new opportunity to build a future full of promise and happiness. David knew the journey ahead would be filled with ups and downs, but he was ready to face them with the same determination and love that had guided his decision. The girl's past had been painful, but her future was now illuminated by the hope and unconditional love they had found together. And so, with each new day, they continued to write their story of transformation and hope, side by side. What would you do in David's place? Would you adopt the abandoned child or just call an ambulance and leave the hospital to handle it? Comment below on what you would do, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this one.